we have some good creative people up here who are as obsessed as I am at times with their areas, and I'm looking at Heidi in particular. Because I think there's some genetic predisposition here. It's something that we should be probably concerned about, but we won't be. It's too late. It's way too late. But we're going to talk about circular policy, where it's come from, where it's going, and one of the most interesting areas is right to repair legislation. And we have someone who we heard earlier, of course, about the right to repair and the legislation that's being passed. And there are plenty of people to credit for that, but I have to distinguish Google as a company for having the wisdom and the enlightened self-interest, I think, to be a leader in advancing the right to repair. And Stephen Nicol has been a leader within the right to repair movement and within Google to make that happen. So, Stephen, I would like to ask you, it's unusual that a company like Google would be, first of all, would counter the dominant business model that seems to be, create products, make it really difficult to upgrade or repair them and fix them so that people buy them again in a couple of years when they, when the brain chemicals have worn off and they need another boost of juice. How did that happen, and why is it happening within Google?
Yeah, no, great question, and it's interesting. We all have our drawers at home or our closets. If you've been in technology for a while, it's a full closet of devices that are kind of just left there, right? You use it for a couple of years and then it just sits there, and so. We realized the value of all those devices being connected and for engaging with our company and with our products is so valuable that there is a strong business argument for this. So, the way we look at it, it doesn't matter what device it is. If it's connected, if it's in the hands, it doesn't matter if you're handing it down to a family member, if you're donating it. I love to shout out to Digitunity in the earlier morning session. There are great organizations out there that take technology and repurpose them for communities that are underserved when it comes to technology. So there's a great business sense, and so. Well, there was also a practical nature for us. We started our hardware business a little over 10 years ago. And you had to figure out, okay, great, we're going to design them, make them, sell them, but you got to also fix them, and you got to support customers with that. So we thought about how did we want to do this, and at that time, and I think still today, there is a pretty big strain of companies that'll basically just say, well, let's send it back to the factories in Asia and remake it, which is really brutal from a carbon footprint point of view, and the frequent flyer miles that these devices are getting, I never understood. But it seemed wrong from the point of view of just starting from our mission statement. We have a very recognizable mission statement, right? We want to take information, we want to take the world's information and make it useful and accessible to people. So if you think about repair being useful and accessible, that model is not useful and accessible. Useful and accessible is I can walk into any store in my neighborhood. That person down the street working in their garage, I drop my phone, I break the display, I get it repaired. That's useful and accessible. So we set about trying to build this model of how do we work with all these partners that could repair our devices. And what's interesting is that just dovetailed beautifully with this right to repair movement, because if you want to do that as a manufacturer, you've got to give them parts. They have to have access to spare parts. You have to give them repair instruction. They have to know how to repair it. And you have to give them the tools necessary. And most importantly, you have to design your product in a way that this is going to be pretty easy for them, as easy as possible. The beauty of that was that as the right to repair really became much a stronger movement, we realized, well, it's really just asking for the same things that we think are common sense of how you should approach repair. And so we felt like, all right, this is a great opportunity to really magnify our voice and really advocate for the right way of doing it there. And so, it was a nice opportunity to be able to use that platform to talk about it loudly.
So it really was kind of part of the business model, if you will, or you needed to have a decentralized infrastructure to take care of repairs and so on, and this became a model for you to do.
Exactly, and I think that's really great when you see policy working really well with just business and pragmatism, when they can encourage each other. And the dialogues we would have was great. I went to several states. I think Kyle mentioned earlier we would testify. But it was also the meetings the day before with all the legislators. You had 15 minutes to go in there and explain this. And they have so many different things that they have to deal with on a daily basis. And so in 15 minutes, how am I going to explain the basics of this and talk about what aspects of this are important? Yeah. And it was just great discussions. They were always just really gracious. There was a desire to get it right. And when they see that that's really what you're trying to do as well, I think there's really an opportunity to move things forward.
Yeah, and it probably makes people feel pretty good inside the company, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's from this morning's discussion as well. You forget companies are made of people.
Yeah.
And people want to do the right thing. And so it was amazing inside Google when we saw some of the success of this. It was just these great feel-good moments. Like, oh wow, this is those aspirational moments. That's why you join Google, because you want to do things like that when you have that opportunity, and when you can make a business argument, which is critical at the end of the day as well, and say, look, this is also good for our business. Yeah. Then you really have a nice combination there.
I remember decades ago now, but when we passed the bottle bill, the depositor CRV system in California, I remember when we had rooms of corporate lawyers, lobbyists who were helping us draft elements of it, and I remember one of them saying that it was like just this enlightening day for him. It was, wow, I've never been in a process before where we were actually solving a problem. And he's used to coming in day after day, and they do their job, and they stop a piece of legislation that's threatening, but he just thought this was like a highlight of his career. And I think to be able to do that in a company, it just feels good.
Truly was. I mean, I never, if you ever told me my career would involve testifying, I'd hope it wouldn't happen.
You don't see very good results.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's usually not that doesn't end well a lot of times. But it was just such a delightful experience, and it really gave you a sense, it really encouraged you about the strength of the process. When it works well, man, it's a beautiful thing.
If it hasn't been turned into a polarized issue. Yeah. But once, if right to repair became, defined as, socialist or capitalist, if somebody either in, extreme woke or extreme MAGA decided that they wanted to demonize it, they could demonize it potentially, and politicians would become afraid of it, and you wouldn't have these lopsided votes.
That's really true, and that's the beauty of this issue. It appeals if sustainability is part of your platform as a politician, that's really key to you. Great, wonderful story there. If small businesses, one of my favorite things, I remember going around visiting schools when my son was going into college, and we're in St. Louis, and I'm in the back of an Uber, and it says, ask me about my smartphone repair business. And I did. We had this wonderful dialogue, and you realize, here is this guy who was doing this out of his garage. He had expanded enough to a couple communities over. And you think, wow, here I am, a representative of a pretty large corporation. And he's able to make a living. He's able to create a business out of this, and that's like, this is great. The synergy of seeing that happen is just delightful.
It feels really good to have been a part of that too. If you enable somebody to do, and you see these businesses popping up because of something you've done in a company, it's a wonder. You kind of look around and say, wow, I've had this impact. I want to turn to, I want to ask one more question, if I may, and that is, strategically, what do we need to do to pass more right to repair laws in more states? What are high priorities now to do the most good with them?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The challenge, you think about, should this be state by state? Should this be a national bill? There were some earlier discussions around national, but it really defaulted to each state. And I think what you hope for, I think speaking both as a manufacturer, but also as a consumer, is you hope for consistency. Because if you have different states, different countries going with different standards and guidelines, it makes it very difficult for me internally to go to product design teams and explain to them, well, okay, but this one, and so if you make it too cumbersome, you'll create a level of frustration that I think will create a backlash. So it's the important thing is just the more alignment you have, and it's okay, the state by state has worked because we've been engaged in the dialogue, others have as well, and they've migrated around this standard kind of principles around right to repair.
So the states have done their jobs in a sense of it's the experimental.
Exactly.
You experiment, and you need to begin to develop some consistency between the laws.
Yeah, and in each state we found that they were very thoughtful about that. They really were considering how do we make sure that we have that consistency, because we want to encourage right behaviors.
That's important, because I can see the argument for having things federalized. At the same time, I realize the federal government is a lot further away from most citizens than the state government is, and it's a lot easier to capture. So, do we want to have things at the federal level? Well, we do from a consistency standpoint, but who do we want to capture it? Or how do we prevent it from being captured and then turned into something that's a profit center, for a narrow interest, usually a political interest as opposed to a corporate interest these days? So.
Yeah, which was great in a lot of the testimony we would do. Kyle and I would testify. There would also be usually a local business, and it was, again, this type of person working out of their garage. Maybe they had 1 or 2 shops as well, and you could see the pride. I mean, here they are testifying and talking about it, and such a personal level, because they're a constituent as well, right?
Yeah.
This is somebody from Boulder who's come down to Denver to testify, for this bill. Yeah. That personalization, it just humanizes the overall experience.
It really does, yeah. So Heidi, as I say, you are as relentless as I am. you have devoted heart and soul and everything else to this cause and related causes. You've been the chairman or the chair of the local utility in Sacramento, and you have at the same time run a series of organizations about stewardship to advance ideas, particularly extended producer responsibility. Tell us a little bit. First of all, tell people what this thing called EPR is, and what's the theory and what's the practice.
Extending producers' responsibility through the end of life, beyond the sale. So it's basically saying, when I got into waste management and I was at the Waste Board in California, and I got asked to be advisor to the chair, and I started seeing the politics, and I was like, why are we putting all this responsibility as an agency on the local governments? They're just like with a catcher's mitt at the back end, passive receivers of everything put on the free market. They don't even know what's coming at them. And somehow we're expecting them to raise taxes and garbage rates to pay for our sorting hundreds of thousands of products out that are now being designed to be, sometimes not repairable and less durable. And I thought, this is not right. Something's wrong here. And then I got to learn about extended producer responsibility. So I was able to convince the chair and other board members, and they voted to get EPR, extending producer responsibilities for the life cycle of the product, into our state strategic plan. And then I realized I had done my job there. I needed to go out and advocate for it, because I didn't see anybody advocating for it. They were afraid of it, thought that it was not going to be possible without a parliamentary governmental system. And so I foolishly went out and created nonprofits that then banged my head against the wall for years, and spent a lot of time educating people. They didn't know what I was talking about, and I started with local governments first. They were the primary beneficiaries of it. And then it was the business community, and then it was the legislators.
So your base was local government, because local government was kind of on the receiving end of all this stuff. And it came into the dump, and they're used to a dump. I mean, there's a well-established waste management industry, and started out with dumps and then became landfills, and there's a science of landfills, and you have the experts, in landfilling, and they have a system that's built for that. But then new products start coming in, they start figuring out, well, okay, what layer of the landfill should those go in? But they're not thinking about recycling. So
well, and they can't, because they couldn't, they had no market. If they could pull it out, they can't sell it.
Yeah.
So if we're going to push it out with mandates, they're just going to have to jack up the rates and make life more unaffordable. That's not solving anything. It's just making people mad, and there's a backlash. So now the goal of EPR is start with the producer. If in a free market, truly working free market, the producer should be paying the costs that they've externalized onto the environment and local governments. If they are, then the polluter pays. Then that is the self-correcting mechanism using economics, and that's why I love EPR. It's so elegant. If they have to pay for the end-of-life costs, they think about how to design something. And if they don't, they don't. It's really that simple.
Yeah.
So,
And they
then
can't
there's
even,
other things we can
in a
put in.
competitive marketplace, if that means taking on a cost that right now is paid for by government, they really can't in a highly competitive marketplace.
Which is why companies ask us to help them pass EPR laws when
Yeah.
they actually want to do it,
Yeah.
because they don't have a fair level playing field. Their costs are going up and have to put in their product price, which makes them uncompetitive with the competitors who don't do it and won't do it, and they'll be free riders if we don't have a system that's fair.
Yeah. Now, you were instrumental in the passage of California's new packaging EPR bill. You've been involved in lots of EPR bills before then.
godmother of EPR,
It's not like the world started, but for many of us, this is our first entree into EPR. What first of all brought EPR to California, and how is the implementation going so far from your perspective?
So basically, I think I really helped bring it to California because there was nobody talking about it until I started talking about it and got it in the chair's office and got it in the state strategic plan. And then when I started educating about it, because I'd seen it in Europe, I'd gone to Europe, I'd gone to Canada, and I'm like, these are the same exact companies selling the same exact products. Why are they saying they can't do it in California?
Yeah.
And by the way, British Columbia has it, and they're 1/4 or 1/10 of our population, and they're way less dense. So if they can do it cost effectively up there, we can do it.
Yeah.
But we had a political resistance. So then it was like overcoming all of that. So, I mean, I did work on the packaging bill. I was one of the 25 people in the room negotiating the bill, the only one from the waste industry NGO side. And I'm very proud of it. You were talking about, the process, and when it goes right, how good it feels. Well, we had American Chemistry Council in the room. We had local governments. We had all kinds of groups in the room for that negotiation. It was 8 months and 100 meetings. And we banged out every word. I've never felt like we did a better process. So it was extremely disappointing when the governor yanked the regs back when they were almost the Office of Administrative Law. And then they got
That's
yanked
the guy.
back.
That guy's running for president now, isn't he?
He seems to be,
Yeah, I wonder
yes.
if that had anything to do with that. But I don't know.
It's a thought.
Yeah. So, but how is it going? I mean, from an idealist's perspective, you might say, well, it's not as good as we wanted it to be. But is it a step forward? And how can we make SB 54 the biggest success it can be?
The bill isn't the problem. It's the regs. The regs changed from what was negotiated and hammered out over 2 years of public testimony. And some language was dropped in that basically was going to exempt like 70% of what was in a grocery store, which was not what we intended at all. So there's going to be litigation, there's no question, but that's the American way, right? I mean, every time we pass a bill, somebody's upset and then somebody sues. So we just passed a textile EPR law, and the first thing that happened was the organizations that didn't win the authority to run the program sued because the state, they don't like who got the producer-run organization designation. So it's just the way we do it. I mean, when I passed the pharmaceutical and needle take-back law, in Alameda County, it was the first, we went to the ordinances first, we couldn't get a state law. They sued all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won. Alameda won. Interstate Commerce Clause was the threat. And the challenge. But this is just going to bounce its way through courts. It always does. And then we'll just see where it lands. But I think it's the best bill in the world. It's the only circular economy bill I know in the world because it does all three things of a circular economy, according to Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is turn off the spigot, design things to be repairable, reusable, durable, all those things, keep materials in motion, organics in the organics natural stream, industrial things in the industrial side, the two shall not cross, that's pollution. And then at the end, you got to go back and clean up nature and the mess that you've made. And we've made a mess everywhere. So that's easy. So we have a $500 million a year, each of 10 years, from the plastics industry to pay for cleaning up California from plastic pollution. I don't know of any other bill in the world that's done all three. So I'm proud of it.
Well,
we just got to make it work.
Congratulations for being such a big part of making that happen. Now, there has been a real transformation in industry, I think, in terms of attitudes toward this kind of legislation, and I have experienced it. I've experienced it in a number of different ways. I mean, for years, I was advocating a bottle bill, of course, as I've talked about in California, and we had a whole set of industry opponents. The entire industry set and their labor unions and so on were all were mostly opposed to us, and it became a kind of almost a religion, I think, on both sides. The supporters and the opponents really did not want their religion to be violated. When I started advancing extended producer responsibility around a decade ago, I think it was, Bobby Kennedy and I actually were working together on this to advance EPR at the state level. And I remember going into a trade association's office, and it was not any of the trade associations that are here. It was not Adams or anybody else's here, but there was one trade association and one lobbyist within that trade association who brought me into his office, and he sat me down and he said, if you keep advocating EPR, none of my CEOs will ever work with you again. And first of all, I thought it was kind of presumptuous to say my CEOs. I'm a trade associate, and they're my CEOs. I own them, and they're going to do what I tell them, and they're not going to ever work with you, which is kind of the opposite of the way it's supposed to go. And that trade association kind of toppled, within about a year, because I think that was not a practice that was going to sell really well. And in the time since, there's been a real shift. The American Chemistry Council has been now for several years supporting extended producer responsibility. Not uniformly every provision of every law, but you have a set of principles that you are following. Tell us, Adam, a bit about that transformation, how it has come about, why our industry, when a trade group shifts, it is a part of a wave, because trade groups can't step out in front of all of their members. So that there's a general consensus within the industry that has shifted. How has that happened, and what effect is it having now?
Well, I came in at the perfect time, because I came in at 2019 is when I started at ACC, right before the pandemic, before the world got weird.
Yeah.
And when I joined, there was strong opposition from all sides for EPR, minimum recycled content, whole host of different things. And at the time, there was a very strong sentiment that voluntary commitments were going to get us there. And then things started to change. Legislatures started to strongly consider that this is a necessary tool that we need in order to increase recycling and to manage local government costs, is where a lot of the motivation came from.
Yeah.
And so I got to be there as I saw the thinking shift.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with primarily the consumer brand companies examining how they wanted to move forward and what are the tools that they were going to need in order to make the commitments that they were making on recyclability, recycled content, and a whole host of things.
Yeah.
And so while I was there, I got to go through the process of really talking deeply with our members to really understand what are the things that they're looking for and the things that they need to see in successful EPR.
Yeah.
And we came up with, I think it's about 10 principles, give or take, of these are the elements that we look for.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest elements I look at when I look at EPR and try to understand, what our role is in it and how we can improve things, I really kind of look at a lot of the Canadian provinces, because one of the things that's very different, and it's difference in cultures, they have a king, they have a different form of government, is that their EPR is incredibly brief. You can read it in about 5 pages. It doesn't go too beyond that. But it really puts a lot of the accountability and a lot of the outcome-based requirements that they put back on industry via the PRO, and it really says, you go figure it out.
So it really wasn't this prescriptive, outsiders trying to define exactly how your company should be carrying out their business. It was, here's your responsibility, go meet it. Figure out how to meet it.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the things, because I have a little bit of show and tell, if I could bring up my first slide, is that beyond just the talking about policy and what we need, we've spent the past year, next slide, we've spent the past year really delving into what is the hardest form of plastic packaging to recycle.
Next slide, I think.
Next slide, please.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, we don't have the,
You have the other one. Okay.
So anyway,
There you go.
what we did is we went through and created a material flow analysis to basically map out where's all the flexible film in California and how do we get it to be recycled at the end. And a couple of the things that we noticed were that while there's a lot of focus on curbside, the vast majority of film that's out there is business to business. So think about the pallet wrap in the back of a warehouse, so for example. And what are the right paths that those need to go to so it can be recycled at the end? And there's a huge amount of it that needs to go to the existing recycling end markets, the traditional mechanical recyclers. But there's also a piece of it when it comes to like chip bags, candy bar wrappers, that you can't really do anything with it but chemically recycle it. And what we're doing now is we're looking at what is the bale specifications, what's the appropriate place where we can take that material, recycle it, and turn it into new products. And so rather than the kind of, as you pointed out, take sort of a religious approach to thing, we've really tried to be thoughtful and data-driven about where is this appropriate and how are we helping the overall recycling system as opposed to just focusing on one part of it.
Now, you brought up the issue of mechanical. When it doesn't work well enough, or there may not be opportunities, you need to move into chemical recycling and other approaches to recycling. I mean, as someone who has advanced recycling for generations, the most of the recycling that I've helped cause happen has been mechanical recycling. And in mechanical recycling, there's low-hanging fruit. There are certain materials that recycle really well. Aluminum is just an ideal material for recycling. Huge, huge energy savings and carbon savings. Paper is a pretty good material to recycle mechanically. Certain kinds of plastics have become good for recycling mechanically over time because the systems have developed for them. But when I look at nature, I see that nature has a lot of creative ways to recycle. And when a tree drops its leaves, nature doesn't take those leaves and reattach them to the tree. Nature takes them apart using biological and chemical recycling processes that simplify at first and then complexify later. It turns them into what would be called downcycling as a first stage, but that's only the first stage. It's taking pieces apart, but then through living systems processes, pulls them back together again, and they become part of the root system, part of the grass, or part of the soil, and so on. So for us to reach very high levels of recycling, we are certainly going to need to follow all of nature's methods, but we're also going to need to learn how to do it safely and reliably and cost-effectively. We are not there yet. We have technologies that will work fairly well, but there will be an evolutionary process. This is kind of a question for any and all of you, how can we be patient to allow those methods to evolve and emerge while at the same time advancing recycling to its highest levels along the way?
I'll go first. So transition is hard because I think a lot of the laws, when they were enacted, had very aspirational goals. And to a certain extent, if you want to get something passed, but you have to have that aspirational goal. But a lot of times, there's not a really clearly defined way that you can have transition and that you can encourage progress towards that goal, because a lot of times you can open yourself up to criticism. And so the way I sort of liken it when I talk with members and folks is sort of like, a really good way to think about it is like when you need to lose weight. And grad school put about 30 pounds on me, so I'm in the middle of that myself. And the best diet or exercise or whatever it is you're going to use is the exercise program you'll actually follow through on. And so a lot of times it feels like as we're implementing EPR, you have somebody sort of wanting to put rules on you that feels like something that might be a little bit more appropriate for an Olympic athlete, when maybe all you need to do is cut out some processed foods and get your 10,000 steps in to get a good start before you move to that next level. But politically, that's extremely hard to convince folks that achievable incremental transition policy is helpful, because you'll hear the criticism back that, well, we need to get it done today, and we need to get it done faster. And they're both kind of right and they're both kind of wrong at the same time, which keeps all of us up here fully employed.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. What are your thoughts, Heidi?
Well, the word you didn't use in that list was affordability.
Yeah.
And none of these are cheap. Anything, mechanical recycling is going to be probably the most affordable thing we do, which is basically a material recovery facility, hand sorting, some automation, et cetera. And then you sort everything out, bale it, and ship it. The chemical recycling process, or I call it chemical processing, I haven't determined yet, and there's so many different technologies, I can't say with one that they're all recycling. But they are very expensive. We're talking in hundreds of millions. There's companies that I've just seen that said that they can't even operate unless they had this $1 a year permit. And I'm like, who gets a $1 a year permit to run a MRF? Nobody. Like, I don't want us subsidizing big, giant black box solutions at the expense of turning off the spigot at the front end with good design and planning. So let's get back to our Element Carta Foundation top things. It's source reduction first, design right. Why do we really need that material? And maybe we do. If we do, especially in certain cases, I know protein packaging is a big deal, you know, for chicken and so forth, the plastic, it's really helpful. It's source reduced and all the things. How do you source reduce that more? How do you recycle it more? Those are challenging things we're dealing with right now. But was that the right material? Is somebody going to come up with a really cool material that's made out of shrimp shells that's going to break down and maybe protect the food well enough, long enough for it to work? We don't know yet. It hasn't been invented maybe. But I'm just worried we're going to build machines that cost hundreds of millions of dollars that need to, you got to feed the beast. Once it's built, then you got to keep it fed or else you can't pay off the debt. So at what expense? There's always a cost-benefit analysis, and that's where I would say we've got to think through the whole thing, because everybody wants a more affordable system, and we want source reduction first.
Yeah. One of the things I've learned, I think, over time is that it's hard to predict innovation. It's hard to predict what is going to emerge when you start to evolve a material, but that nature is a good guide of the kinds of directions that you go. Now, I know with mechanical recycling, where it happens, it is generally the most cost-effective way to recycle, but just as nature has found it more economical to use biology and use chemistry as a way to recycle, much more than it uses just mechanics. Isn't there an evolutionary period where we can maybe use the infrastructure that we already have, rather than building whole new infrastructures based on preliminary designs that are not very advanced? Can we use the infrastructure that we already have to see what works and then let nature kind of take its course? Is there a way to do that?
Well, quickly, we have seen facilities where they've kind of patched onto an existing processing facility, a chemical recycling ad. That's way more affordable, but it's still a lot of money, a lot. So I haven't seen one yet that I would go, oh, that's totally cost effective. It makes total sense for, right. I haven't seen the numbers, I don't, and I'm hearing they need policy changes to make the numbers work. Well, that means the numbers don't work. And if that's the case, then for now, why don't we invest in turning off the spigot so when we do get to that point and things have evolved, we can actually right-size the system so we don't need as much money.
So the key, from your perspective, is to follow that sequence of reduce, reuse, recycle. And you want to make sure that in advancing recycling, we are not end running those two that come before it, that we are reducing and reusing, and then recycling is going to take a variety of forms.
Nobody wants stranded assets of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah. So we don't want to strand those assets, but we want to make sure that we are advancing reduction.
Right.
And do you think we are at a point where we know the policies that will advance advance source reduction, and I say this as an entree to something I want to add to the conversation. But are there ways to do that?
Oh, yeah, we did that. I'm sorry. I guess
Yeah.
I shouldn't have ended that.
Yeah.
I keep,
Just take it back.
source reduction was a big deal in SB 54.
Yes, yeah.
In fact, we wanted plastic source reduced the most because they do interrupt nature when they escape. So, especially the ocean. So we got it down to 25% of the total platform. So we didn't say this one package has to be reduced 25% by 2030.
Yeah.
We said that across the whole of the packaging platform. That means that some can be source reduced far more than others because the chicken wrap, that's the hardest. They've already done that source reduction.
Yeah.
But other things have 3 layers: secondary, tertiary packaging, plastic, plastic, plastic.
Yeah.
So they can maybe do more and lean in on that. But that's where the producer-run organization is going to help. And they said eco-modulated fees. We got that into the bill. So there's incentives and disincentives.
I see, yeah.
That if you sell a ton of something onto the market and that thing, costs a lot more to the system, it's a contaminant, it's styrofoam, for example, it's always getting in the way, little pellets break off, it's getting everywhere.
Yeah.
We don't want that in there. So that would pay a much higher fee per ton to sell into California. Of course, now it's banned, but than another packaging type or material.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna the only other person that we wanted on this panel who had to cancel was the new president of Citizens Climate Lobby, and I wanted him on because I wanted to put on the table another policy that I think helps frame this and also helps to drive source reduction, and that is pricing pollution, pricing carbon in particular, but pricing pollution, because we have seen globally that when we have a simple revenue neutral tax shift where we are reducing taxes on prosperity and things that we want, or reducing taxes on payroll or reducing taxes on income, and instead shifting them to taxes on carbon, that people find thousands and millions of ways to source reduce because they save money. So a framework of carbon pricing within which a framework of EPR is there is one of those combinations that I think could work, and something that also has broad-based support, except in the political system, where, of course, the extremes on both sides don't like it for different reasons. So,
In elections, people
Yeah.
change policy.
yeah. Stephen and Adam?
You haven't talked.
Yeah, fascinating discussion. I think, innovation is driven by constraints. Anytime you create a product requirements document. Everything you say you're going to make in a product, there's a million things you're not going to make, right?
Yeah.
So this is all about constraint. A constraint of that is also then repairability and making sure that you're putting that thought into the process as well. I mean, for us, when we were a few years into this process and we had really, the whole business understood our repair model as well,
Yeah.
we were about to release a model, one of our phones, where to calibrate, like software calibration to make sure, like let's say you drop your phone, the display breaks off, you put a new display, now you have a fingerprint sensor and maybe a face recognition. It's got to be calibrated to that, right? The old one has to know that the new one's there.
Yeah.
This software a lot of times is proprietary and it exists in a factory as opposed to anywhere else. And so this was a big part for us around right to repair that we felt was important. It's called parts pairing. It's basically the idea of a software lock. I can't repair it unless I have the factory tool.
Yeah.
And we were going down this path after several models of this, and it was pretty late in the process when we stopped and said, wait a minute, this breaks our entire, we told you, this is about accessibility and making sure we can repair at walk-in centers, stores, everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, we sat down with the head of engineering for the product with his team, and we explained this, and he looked at his team and said, folks, we got to fix this. And so there's this great constraint that came out of certainly our mission and our focus on this area, but eventually as legislation comes around, it helps nudge that forward.
Yeah.
It helps give you a voice, and it just puts it on the table and says you need to design for this.
Yeah.
So the great thing is they designed a tool that they could put on the web that was fully secure, but that any technician could download, use it, make sure it worked, and have access to it. And the comments that we got were unbelievable. I mean, it was just great to see all of these comment threads. We got a lot of media attention, which is also helpful to move a company internally when you see, hey, the media is interested in this, and the marketing messaging is there. ultimately it becomes, is it important to the consumer? And when you can use this voice, in this case technicians, or also in the case of end users and the importance of repairability, the more that the consumers are out there saying, yeah, this is important to us, that's how you really move organizations to say, yeah, let's do more of this. This is great.
Yeah.
We only have a few minutes left in this session, so I wonder if we should ask others what their reactions and comments might be
Let's
as well.
ask others what their reaction is. See, and this is, by the way, doozy. I just want to, before I neglect to do so, I would like a round of applause for Doozy, who I have a staff of 14, and it's doozy, and so it's great that she has put a lot of the detail into all this and made it happen. So I just want to recognize and thank her for all of her work. Thank you, doozy. So
it's a great discussion. Thank you very much. I have two quick questions. One is, you talked about how the municipalities were bearing the brunt of it before EPR, and with EPR, the idea is to shift it to the producers. But how, in both situations, is there a way to avoid getting to the affordability issue, that not just getting passed on to the consumers of the products ultimately? And then second question is just, Bill mentioned the carbon taxing. Are there other policy ideas that you have that would deal more with the demand side, so we don't end up with warehouses full of recycled plastic with no buyers to purchase it?
yeah.
Okay. So for the first question, so I'm Heidi the consumer, and I'm also Heidi the taxpayer, ratepayer. And if I buy a product, I'm buying it for my personal use, and I made the choice. So if it's very expensive to handle at end of life, should I pay or should we socialize all those costs? That's my question. And to me, the answer is it's my personal responsibility. I chose to buy that product, and I'm the one who benefited from using it. It's not fair to externalize those costs onto my neighbors. So I would rather it go in the product price, but I want the system to be as efficient and cost effective as possible. It does not make sense. I just testified on a bill for oil recycling. It does not make sense. I was asked the affordability question. It's all anybody wants to hear in California right now. And I said, it's not efficient to have every single city and county come up with their own oil and lubricant recycling program and education program. Does anybody think that's a great idea? No. So to have one centrally done by the manufacturers of that product who know it better than anybody and can distribute it, get it back, they're the only ones that have a re-refinery. Doesn't it make sense to have one program, one message, one of all the things, and they can use the economies of scale? That's what we're doing. And so if they pass that cost on to the consumer, they will, but it's going to be a lot more cost effective and I think fair.
I'll answer, or I'll give my input on the second part of that question. How do we prevent these materials from accumulating and just having loads of them? And I think Edwards Deming, I don't know if that name is familiar to people, but he is the father of, what was it called? The Japanese model. It was attributed to the Japanese, the father of continuous improvement, and he preached a message that was credited with bringing Japan's extraordinary industrial leaps forward, and that was that you use the infrastructure and the equipment that you have. You don't go out and just replace it. You use what you have, and you build on that, and you improve on that, and then when you hit on a profit model, then you can reliably expand. And that, Toyota took that method up, number one, and adopted it, and had their teams of people empowered to continuously improve every aspect of their operations, and then were able to invest their capital wisely rather than making big, heroic changes that didn't turn out. GM, and bless their souls, they're great at this, but they invented some tremendous hydrogen-based vehicles, but they weren't attached to the market enough to actually get into the marketplace. So Toyota, sped past, if you will. Adam, you have?
I have two thoughts to share on that.
One is when you have very prescriptive rules or an underlying law, it inevitably leads to more costs. And a lot of that, and this is just my view, is that I think folks have gotten focused on we need a small circle instead of being okay with a bigger circle. And in my view, when I talk to the public and when I work with folks, their biggest priority is I don't want it in the landfill. And anything you can do to keep something in circularity is a good thing. And so in my mind, that's one of the biggest things to really focus on. And then the second part is what I said originally, was that Canadian EPR sets out goals, it assigns accountability, and it leaves it to industry to figure it out and to accomplish it. And the more that we take tools off the table, we question things to death, the harder it is to accomplish those goals. And one of the things I was going to share with you today is that we're building out the material flow diagram of what is the equipment that needs to go where, what is this, like it's down to details that get beyond just talking points, and what's the appropriate place for our members' technology to play an appropriate role in that. And that's the part that I'm most excited about, is to sort of leave the politics to other folks, but to get into the data and the material flows and the breaking up a bale and counting all the little pieces in there to actually solve things. And that's the part that we need more attention to, a little less on the sort of the political parts of it that are good stuff for for other places, but not when you're trying to solve the issue.
We have a question right there.
Hi.
And Doozy, are we going to have to wrap this after this, or one more question after this?
One more and then we're done.
Last question.
Well, one after you.
Oh, okay. Last one. Regarding EPR, and especially focusing on reuse, and for instance, over in Europe, they have an initiative called PPWR, which is requiring 40% of the delivery parcels by 2030 to be reusable parcels for home delivery. And I don't see that level of focus on reuse within like the US or maybe even Canada on delivery parcels. And if you could comment on that.
You're talking about mail?
Yeah, like e-commerce, goods.
Well, I can tell you we got the only reuse and refill targets that I know of in the U.S. in SB 54, and we almost lost the bill because environmental advocates were so upset that we were letting it go at 2% and 4%. I stuck by that and said we're having to rebuild the entire infrastructure. That's not easy. It's not going to happen overnight. And but there were advocates that wanted 25% in there. And I took a lot of heat. I remember one Sunday call for 2 hours with 80 advocates yelling at me.
80?
Telling me that I was totally selling out.
Yeah, that's what you would do.
Right. Doesn't that sound like me?
Oh, yeah, it sounds like you.
So all I'm saying is people, we've got 10% over here, 10% over here, and the majority are in the middle. And that's where I stay, because I will stand by reasonable, fair rules any day of the week. But we could not get anywhere near where Europe is. Germany has, I think, 25% reusable, refillable beverage containers. Canada has got all their beer is sold in the same actual style of glass bottles so that they can just slap a different label on it and reuse them, refill them 12, 14 times. Huge greenhouse gas reduction. Very smart. We are way far away from that. So we got it in there. Everybody's screaming about it. One side hated me for doing it. So if nobody's happy, it's probably good. And it's going to move the ball down the field, and then the next thing will come. And I say cherry pick off these bills. They get better over time. We learn more. Every single bill that passes, we learn something, and we plug another hole. And that's just continuous improvement.
Terrific, terrific.
The only thing I would add to that is, and this is just my studied opinion, is that EPR can be really effective when it's really zoned in on something really specific, and it's recycling. It's not to say that reuse and those other things are not unimportant, but the more that you add, and now you're in charge of this, and you're in charge of this, and in charge of this, very different systems, very different objectives. And so my concern, and Heidi, I'm glad you stood up for those of us in the center, is that when you start adding all of these things, is that you don't want to create something that's so complicated that it's going to fail just because you're drawing from all these different knowledge bases. And so for me, EPR should be really focused on recycling, because there's a lot of literature to support that it's good at that and creating the infrastructure to that end.
And I want to emphasize that in the work of Circle America, we want to fill the gap on source reduction policy, because at least in my view, we haven't yet really thought through how to source reduce effectively in ways that really drive down costs. And I would like to see these laws be the opposite of affordability problems for consumers. When you take an action that genuinely drives down resource intensity, you should also be reducing economic costs while you're reducing environmental costs. And so, to the extent possible, as Heidi was saying, we don't want to layer the system with big new costs that are going to show up, at the store. We're going to have a rebellion, as we should. We want to have a system that learns how to reduce costs. And it'll take time to do that.
And I can end on a good news story that Williams-Sonoma in California, after we passed SB 54, within 8 months, they had gone to a completely fiber platform, had changed all their packaging away from plastic, and they are saving money.
Beautiful.
So it can be done, and some companies lead in doing it, but it was because of the bill that was inspirational, and their Atlantic Packaging helped them get there through giving them consultation.
Nice.
So there's
Nice.
good stories.
Thank you to our panel. And thank you to all of you.